Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is not the one that speaks, but the one that listens, waits, and trusts. There is power in silence, and today I will show you why keeping your mouth shut is one of the holiest things you'll ever do. There is a silence that is sacred, not the absence of sound, but the presence of power. A hush that hovers not out of fear, but out of fierce discernment. It is the kind of silence that wraps itself around a soul who has lived through the thunder and come out on the other side, wiser, more watchful, more willing to listen than to speak. You see, silence has long been misunderstood. People mistake it for weakness, for submission, for a lack of courage. But silence, when guided by spirit, becomes a weapon of the highest form, a shield forged in divine patience, a sword sharpened by clarity, a strategy anointed with fire. For those who truly walk with God know that the tongue is not always the first weapon in warfare. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to your enemy, to your oppressor, to your accuser, is to say absolutely nothing. To be silent when provoked is not to surrender. It is to stand still and know that there is a God who speaks on your behalf. It is to understand that words have weight, and when they are spoken prematurely, they lose their thunder. But when words are allowed to marinate in silence, they return with authority. This world has conditioned us to react, to respond, to shout when we are hurt, to scream when we are angry, to justify when we are judged. But silence teaches you restraint. Silence disciplines your spirit to rise above the noise, to resist the bait of the enemy who knows that one wrong word can destroy your character, your calling, your crown. There are times when silence is not only the wisest answer, it is the most spiritual response. It says, I could tell you what I know, but I choose to protect my peace. It says, I could defend myself, but I know my defender is greater than my explanation. Silence is what Jesus kept before his crucifiers. It is what prophets held when their words would fall on deaf ears. It is what the spiritually mature carry with them like armor in a world obsessed with being heard. Silence is not forgetting. It is remembering that not every noise deserves an echo. It is learning that timing is everything, and a soul that waits on God speaks only when heaven says speak. The strength it takes to hold your tongue, to still your emotions, to breathe through the fire and remain unmoved, that strength is not natural. It is supernatural. It is given to those who have sat long enough in silence to understand its purpose. For silence is not just the absence of speech, it is the presence of God. It is the sacred space where strategy is born, where vision is clarified, where battles are won without lifting a single word. There is a season in your life where you will be called to keep quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because God is shaping what He wants to say through you. You will feel the urge to correct, to respond, to argue, to set the record straight, but the Spirit will say, hush. And in that hush, you will find yourself armed with something far more dangerous than rage: clarity. In that hush, you will find the voice of God louder than the voices of men. In that hush, you will become dangerous, not because you shouted, but because you refused to stoop to noise. Silence is how you stay seated while the storm rages. Silence is how you hear God while the world trembles in chaos. Silence is how you remind the enemy that your trust is not in talk, it's in truth. There is power in keeping your mouth shut. Not passive power, but intentional, divine, prophetic power. Silence is not for those who are weak of heart. It is for those who know how to carry stillness like a sword. It is for those who've learned that silence can cut deeper than a scream, can carry more truth than 1,000 arguments, can echo louder than applause. In the silence, you become untouchable. Not because you're invisible, but because you're indestructible. You rise above offense, above conflict, above distraction. You become a vessel, silent, still, steady, waiting only for the voice of God to speak through you when the time is holy. There is a weight to words, a gravity to the sound of the human voice when it is carried by intention. But when words come too early, before wisdom has seasoned them, before discernment has tested them, before time has revealed their purpose, they become dangerous. There is a cost, a deep and often unseen price to speaking too soon. It is the cost of broken trust, of misaligned timing, of opening doors that were never meant to be opened in haste. When a soul grows impatient with silence and chooses speech without reverence, it invites chaos into spaces that were meant for stillness. You can lose your influence with one careless sentence. You can wound a heart that was meant to be protected. You can turn a moment of divine formation into a lifetime of regret because your mouth moved before your spirit was ready. The cost of speaking too soon is the theft of mystery. There are things that God whispers into your spirit that are not meant for public consumption. Sacred things, hidden things, things still in the womb of becoming. When you speak them too quickly, when you lay them bare before the world prematurely, you expose them to misunderstanding, ridicule, and spiritual attack. Not everything that is revealed to you is meant to be released right away. Revelation must be held with trembling hands, cradled in secrecy, nurtured in the quiet. But the ego wants to share. The ego wants to prove. The ego wants to be the first to speak and the loudest in the room. And so we talk before we are taught. We announce before we are anointed. We declare before we are disciplined. And we pay the price in peace, in purpose, in broken relationships that could have been preserved with a moment of silence. You must understand that timing is as holy as truth. Even the right word spoken at the wrong time can birth destruction. The truth too early can become a lie by misplacement. There are battles lost not because the warrior was weak, but because the warrior spoke too soon, revealed the strategy too early, trusted the wrong ears with sacred knowledge. There is a discipline in waiting, in holding your tongue until the moment is ripe, until the season shifts, until the Holy Spirit says, now. For when you speak before your soul is aligned, your words become fragments, truth without anchor, fire without direction. And fire without wisdom burns down what God was still trying to build. The cost of speaking too soon can also be relational. Sometimes the mouth will betray the heart, not out of malice, but out of impatience. You'll speak when you should have listened. You'll argue when you should have observed. You'll try to explain yourself when what was needed was your silence. And then trust breaks, connection weakens, and you'll find yourself grieving conversations that should never have happened, or moments when you revealed too much to someone who was not ready to receive it. There is a deep wisdom in keeping some things between you and God until He releases you to speak. But that kind of discipline is forged in the furnace of restraint, a place few are willing to endure. You don't just risk embarrassment when you speak too soon. You risk destiny. There are doors that close because you gave a voice to your fear instead of holding it until it was shaped by faith. There are friendships that sour because you shared your suspicion instead of letting time reveal truth. There are opportunities missed because you argued when you should have prayed. You cannot measure the cost of premature speech in words alone. It echoes into the spirit. It shifts the atmosphere. It sends ripples into futures you cannot see. That is why wisdom waits. That is why the spiritually mature pause. That is why those who walk closely with the divine learn to love the quiet, to linger in silence, to bite the tongue not out of cowardice, but out of covenant. For when you speak too soon, you offer your voice without God's hand behind it. And a voice without his hand has no covering. It is exposed to wind, to warfare, to interpretation, to manipulation. It floats fragile, unguarded in the air, vulnerable to the wrong ears and the wrong spirits. And suddenly, what was once pure becomes polluted, not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't time. There is a language the soul understands that has no sound, no syllable, no syntax. It is the language of stillness, the holy hush that comes over you when the world grows loud and your spirit retreats into the quiet. It is there, in that sacred, breathless space, where divine instruction begins. Not in the clamor of opinions, not in the roar of performance, not in the echo chamber of praise or criticism. No, the voice of God, when it teaches, when it guides, when it corrects, comes not in thunder, but in whispers. And those whispers can only be caught by the heart that knows how to be still. This is not the kind of silence born of loneliness or emptiness. It is the silence that is full, overflowing with presence, so thick with the weight of heaven that even the birds seem to pause in flight. It is not emptiness, it is reverence. It is not absence, it is saturation. And it is in this holy silence that the most profound lessons are etched into the soul. We live in a world where everyone is speaking, broadcasting thoughts, projecting fears, announcing intentions, shouting desires, but very few are hearing, few are discerning, few are listening beneath the surface of the noise. We want answers on demand. We want direction without discipline. We want divine clarity without quieting ourselves. But God does not shout over your chaos. He waits until you lower the volume of your life. He waits until your heart grows quiet enough to hear the sacred instruction he's been whispering all along. You must go inward. You must turn off the applause. You must release the addiction to noise and retreat into silence. Not because silence is comfortable, but because silence is where truth lives. It is in the quiet that your false identities fall away. It is in the quiet that your distractions lose their grip. It is in the quiet that God begins to speak, not just to your mind, but to your inner being. In that silence, you don't just hear what to do, you begin to understand why. You don't just receive answers, you receive alignment. You begin to feel the weight of decisions you once made lightly. You begin to see the layers behind the lessons. The divine does not rush, it does not shout, it unfolds, it reveals. It leads you like a river, not a race. And unless you are still, unless you are quiet, you will miss the subtleties that carry the most sacred instructions. Sometimes God doesn't give you the whole path, He gives you the next step. But if you're too busy, too loud, too proud, you'll miss even that. Divine instruction is subtle, specific, often strange to the world, but deeply resonant to the soul that has been trained in stillness. Silence is not just the absence of speech, it is the posture of surrender. When you are silent before God, you are saying, I trust your voice more than mine. I trust your timing more than my schedule. I trust your thoughts more than the noise of the crowd. And in that trust, in that sacred stillness, he begins to teach. He may not always use words. Sometimes it's a feeling, sometimes a deep knowing, sometimes a sense of peace that passes all logic. But you'll never find it in the shouting. You'll never grasp it if you refuse to slow down. Divine instruction is like dew, not a flood. It rests gently upon the soul. It nourishes over time. It requires you to wait, to listen, to be present enough to notice the voice behind the silence. And so the Spirit begins to train you, to lead you into quiet rooms, to sit you down when you want to run, to hush you when you want to defend, to quiet your spirit so that heaven can finish a sentence you've been interrupting with your anxiety. And slowly, lesson by lesson, the instruction unfolds, not in bullet points, but in moments, in revelations, in subtle shifts within your own breath. And it is there, in that breath, in that pause, in that profound and patient silence, that God speaks so clearly the world cannot unhear it through you. There is a wisdom that does not come wrapped in intellect or eloquence, but in restraint, the kind that teaches the soul that silence can be mightier than speech, and stillness stronger than resistance. You see, not every battle placed before you is yours to fight, and certainly not every fight requires your words. There is a sacred discernment that must rise within you to separate the battles sent to shape you from the ones sent to distract you. Many times the enemy does not want your defeat. He simply wants your attention. He does not need your surrender. He wants your energy. He is content to see you drained, entangled in arguments that serve no purpose, answering accusations that do not deserve your breath, fighting shadows with the sharpness of your tongue. But if you are to walk with grace, with power, with holy fire, you must learn when to open your mouth and when to let your silence carry the weight of your dignity. Words are powerful, they build, they break, they heal, they destroy, but when used without wisdom, they become weapons without targets, burning bridges that were never meant to be crossed with rage. You do not need to speak on everything. You do not need to reply to everyone. You do not owe the world your voice every time it cries out for a reaction. Some things are traps dressed in urgency, and your peace is the bait. Some battles are beneath the spirit you carry, and the moment you engage, you come down from the heights you were called to. There is a high cost to responding in places where God has called you to stand still. There are battles meant to be watched, not won. Some enemies defeat themselves in time. You need only wait and watch. We were taught that silence is weakness, that the loudest one is the victor, that to speak is to prove you matter. But the mature soul knows better. The mature soul has learned through bruises and betrayal, through wasted breath and broken moments, that not every conversation is sacred, and not every stage is yours to stand on. Sometimes the greatest show of strength is walking away without needing the last word. Sometimes power is not in the roar of a comeback, but in the calm of your composure. You do not always need to defend yourself. Let them misunderstand. Let them talk. Let them whisper their opinions like wind. Your truth is not shaken by the storm. It is rooted in the soil of your character. God does not need your help to fight every battle. He is not looking for noise. He is looking for obedience. And sometimes obedience looks like zipped lips and folded hands. It looks like trusting that vengeance is not yours. It looks like stepping aside while heaven handles what you cannot see. It takes divine discipline to watch someone lie on your name and still bless them in your prayers. It takes spiritual maturity to smile when the world expects you to break. But that kind of power does not come from reaction. It comes from revelation. You were not created to wrestle with every critic or war with every fool. You were made for higher things, for deeper peace, for sacred victories that don't require an audience. There are people who will try to bait you into battles that are born of their own brokenness. They will want you to bleed just to prove you feel. Don't fall for it. Some provocations are not personal, they're spiritual. And the moment you step into that ring, you lower your calling to meet their chaos. Do not confuse emotional impulse with righteous warfare. Not every injustice is yours to correct. Not every slight is yours to respond to. There is a difference between being silent out of fear and being silent out of fire. Holy fire that knows when to burn and when to be still, when to fight, and when to let God do the fighting for you. Hold your tongue like a sword that you refuse to unsheath without divine permission. Guard your words as you would your heart, for some battles are won not in the noise of argument, but in the quiet of self-control. And in that quiet, heaven moves, angels stand guard, and your name is protected by hands greater than yours. Maturity is not measured by the sharpness of your tongue, nor the swiftness of your reply. It is not seen in your ability to argue well, nor in your hunger to always be heard. No, true maturity, the kind that is carved into the soul through pain, time, reflection, and restraint, is knowing when to speak and when to be still. It is knowing that your voice is powerful, yes, but that power is not meant to be spent on every passing moment, every petty comment, every need to correct or defend. Maturity listens longer than it talks. It observes before it reacts. It discerns before it declares. It watches the room, senses the temperature, and chooses silence not because it is weak, but because it is wise. You see, the immature spirit confuses reaction with strength. It jumps to respond. It rushes to explain. It is uncomfortable with stillness because it has not yet learned that silence can be a shield. But the mature soul has sat with its own storms long enough to recognize that everything does not deserve a response. Every offense does not require your correction. Every misunderstanding does not need your explanation. Maturity whispers to you in moments of heat, wait, breathe, hold. This is not yours to carry. And the one who listens to that voice finds that stillness often wins battles that words never could. There is something deeply holy about the person who can be silent without being silenced, who can hold their peace when chaos calls them by name, who can look a storm in the eye and choose calm over conflict. That kind of discipline is not born in a day. It is born through the ache of saying too much in the past. It is born in the ruins of arguments that left more broken than built. It is born in the aftermath of speaking too soon, too loud, too long. Maturity is the child of regret that has grown into wisdom. And with that wisdom comes the revelation that sometimes your silence speaks louder than your speech, and that to be still is not to be absent. It is to be intentional. You don't have to announce everything you know. You don't have to prove every truth you carry. The most seasoned voices are often the quietest in the room because they have learned that timing is everything, that the right word spoken at the wrong moment can do more harm than good. That wisdom not only teaches what to say, but reveals when to say it. Maturity gives you the patience to let others talk while you gather truth. It gives you the grace to withhold your opinion until your spirit is clear. It gives you the strength to let a moment pass without inserting yourself into it. The stillness of a mature person is not void, it is full, full of knowing, full of awareness, full of the presence of restraint. It is a stillness that listens to the divine before it responds to the world. It is a quiet that has been cultivated in prayer, in solitude, in the long and patient conversations between the soul and the sacred. This kind of stillness is not emptiness, it is choice. The choice to let the moment breathe, the choice to preserve peace, the choice to lead not with words, but with the weight of your presence. It is easy to speak. It is far harder to be silent when the flesh is rising, when the ego wants justice, when the heart is wounded and the mind is swirling with what could be said. But maturity holds it. Maturity says, not now. Maturity steps back and watches the dust settle, trusts that some truths reveal themselves in time. It knows that stillness is not indifference, it is mastery. Mastery over the self, mastery over emotion, mastery over the compulsion to always have the last word. A mature spirit is not quiet because it lacks something to say. It is quiet because it knows that saying it in the wrong moment can cost more than staying silent ever will. It understands the sacred rhythm between voice and quiet, between sound and soul, between divine impulse and human impatience. And in that rhythm, it has found peace. Not the peace that avoids the world, but the peace that carries authority in every room, even when it says nothing at all. There is a holy tenderness in the quiet moments when no one else is around and your soul begins to speak in whispers only God can hear. In a world that thrives on visibility, on sharing every thought, every pain, every revelation for public consumption, the sacredness of private conversations with God becomes a quiet rebellion, a return to intimacy that does not need validation, applause, or response. These conversations are not for performance. They are not designed to be recorded or remembered by crowds. They are sacred, wrapped in the stillness of solitude, held gently in the palm of the Almighty, covered by grace that does not need to be explained. They are not always articulate. Sometimes they are tears. Sometimes they are sighs too deep for words. Sometimes they are the long silences of a weary soul curled up in divine presence, saying more with stillness than 1,000 sermons ever could. There are things you tell God that no one else will ever know, and they are not secrets born out of shame. They are confessions born out of trust, a trust that knows He will never mishandle your truth. He will not twist your words. He will not use your vulnerability against you. He will not weaponize your weakness or make a mockery of your questions. He simply listens, and in that listening, there is healing. Not because He answers everything right away, but because you are finally in the presence of someone who hears with holiness, someone who holds your heart without judgment. In these private conversations, you do not have to be strong. You do not have to perform. You do not have to be eloquent. You just have to be real. God does not need you to sound like a preacher when you pray. He needs you to sound like yourself. Some of the most profound revelations are born not in church pews or conference rooms, but in bedrooms at 3 a.m. when the tears won't stop and the soul is unraveling beneath the weight of unspoken things. It is in those hours when your heart trembles and your hope flickers that God leans in the closest. And He doesn't always speak in return. Sometimes He just stays. And that staying becomes the answer you didn't know you needed. The assurance that even in silence, even in the darkness, you are not alone. The sacredness of these moments lies not in their loudness, but in their authenticity. They are unfiltered, unedited, unrefined, and that rawness becomes a kind of worship, honest, broken, holy. When you learn to talk to God in private, you stop needing so much from people in public. You stop waiting for validation. You stop looking for others to fix what only God can reach. You begin to move differently, not with arrogance, but with assurance. Assurance that there is a place, a space where you are fully known and still fully loved. And that space becomes your refuge. It becomes the place you return to again and again, not out of routine, but out of need. You begin to understand that prayer is not an obligation. It is a lifeline. It is not a religious performance. It is a relationship. And like all relationships, it deepens through honesty, through consistency, through presence. The more you go to God in private, the more you carry Him with you in public. You begin to speak less and listen more. You begin to trust that you do not need to share every burden with the world, because the one who created the world already carries it with you. There is a reason why Jesus slipped away to pray in the mountains, a reason why prophets sought caves and deserts to hear from heaven, because some messages are meant for your ears only. Some instructions are too holy to be spoken aloud until the appointed time. Some anointings are formed in secret, away from the crowds, shaped in the furnace of intimacy where no one is watching. And when you emerge, you don't come back the same, not because you shouted, but because you listened, not because you posted it, but because you prayed it. The sacredness of those private conversations does not lie in what you say, but in the presence of the one who never leaves when you say it.